Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is 10 o'clock. My name is Nicola Bedin, and pursuant to Article 11.2 of the bylaws, as chairman of the Board of Directors, I will chair today's ordinary shareholder meetings and declare the meeting open. I invite Carlo Marchetti, Notary Public, to serve as secretary, and Mr. Marchetti accepts. I inform you that due to the emergency linked to the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic and taking into account the measures to contain infections, the company has resorted to the provision envisaged by Article 106, subsection 4 of Law Decree 18 of March 17, 2020, setting out measures for strengthening the national healthcare service and economic support for families, workers, and businesses connected with the COVID-19 emergency, the effectiveness of which has been extended by Article 3, subsection 6, Law Decree 183 of December 31st, 2020, and converted by Law Number 21 of February 26, 2021, establishing that the shareholders' meeting will be attended by those entitled to vote, and the exercise of the vote shall occur only through the appointed representative of the company pursuant to Article 135 of our Law Decree 58 of 24 of February 1998. Without prejudice to the foregoing, participation in the shareholders' meeting by those duly entitled, considering the limits that may arise due to the aforementioned requirements, can only occur through remote devices that guarantee identification of participants. I inform you that those duly entitled to participate are connected remotely through devices that allow them to be identified. And I confirm that I have personally verified the identity and entitlement of the attendees to participate in the debate and voting. I would like to inform you that pursuant to the current provisions, the call notice for the shareholders meeting was published in full on the company website on March 29, 2021, and a summary was published in the following newspapers, Il Sole 24 Ore, and in English, Financial Times on March 30, 2021. The agenda is as follows. Snam S.p.A. financial statement as at 31st of December 2020, consolidated financial statement as at December 31st, 2020, reports of the directors, the board of statutory auditors, and the independent auditing firm, related and consequent resolutions. Item 2, allocation of the profits for the year and distribution of the dividend. Item 3, authorization to purchase and dispose of treasury shares, subject to revocation of the authorization granted by the ordinary shareholders meeting on June 18, 2020, for the part not yet implemented. Item 4, report on remuneration policy and compensation paid. 4.1, first section, report on the remuneration policy binding resolution. 4.2, second section, report on the compensation paid, non-binding resolution. Item 5, proposal to change the 2020-2022 long-term share incentive plan, related and consequent resolutions. In addition to the chairman, the Chief Executive Officer, Marco Alverà, and the following directors are present: Laura Cavatorta, Francesco Gori, Yung Peng He, Antonio Marano, Francesca Pace, Rita Rolli, and Alessandro Tonetti. The chairman of the board of the statutory auditors, Stefano Gnocchi, and the standing auditors, Gianfranco Chinellato and Donata Paola Parini, are also present. I would like to inform you that the share capital amounts to 2,735,670,475.56 euros, divided into 3,360,857,809 shares without par value. I inform you that currently we have 1,833 shareholders in attendance for a total of 2,480,574 shares, representing 72.72% of the voting capital. I invite Mr. Macchetti to provide necessary information to be able to declare today's shareholders meeting duly constituted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to share with you additional info. Pursuant to Articles 12 and 14 of the European Regulation GDPR, you are informed that personal data, first and last name, place of birth, residence, and professional qualifications of those attending the shareholders meeting was and will be obtained in the forms and within the limits connected to the obligations, tasks, and purposes set out in the law. Said data will be included in the minutes of the shareholders meeting after manual and automated processing and will be disclosed and disseminated even abroad, also outside the EU, in the forms and within the limits strictly connected to the law in force. List of names of those entitled to participate via proxy, indicating the number of shares held by each and the delegating shareholder, shall be annexed to the minutes of the shareholders meeting. Please note that a recording system is in operation for the sole purpose of assisting the preparation of the minutes. That recording will be available on the company website. That simultaneous translation from Italian into English is provided, as recommended by Concept. Financial analysts, journalists, and qualified experts will follow the proceedings of the shareholders meeting through the aforementioned recording. I inform you that pursuant to Article 4.2 of the regulation, the Chairman office has been set up. Rosmaria Balla and Stefano Spezzaghi are located there. I inform you that regarding today's shareholders meeting, the requirements of statutory law and of the regulations on regulated markets have been complied with. Lastly, voting at today's shareholder meeting shall take place through the representative, who shall cast votes on the basis of the voting instructions received. Pursuant to the law, the company has appointed the law firm Trevisan and Associati, represented here by Dario Trevisan, as authorized representative. Yes, I'm attending, on whom those entitled might confer a proxy with voting instructions on all or some of the proposals on the agenda. The designated representative is invited to make all the declarations required by law and, where necessary, as to speak on any matter or as questions are requested by the shareholders. Mr. Chairman? Yes, I declare that today's shareholders meeting is duly constituted and entitled to resolve on the topics listed on the agenda. I inform you that the company has received no requests to supplement the agenda or new proposals of resolutions pursuant to law and Article 126 of the CLF. The entitlement to vote of the participants have been checked and verified based on the circumstances known to the company and the declarations made. I ask the appointed representative to report any lack of entitlement to vote or exclusions from voting or the existence of any shareholders' agreements, this in relation to all votes pursuant to the law and to the current regulations and the bylaws. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I declare I have nothing to report in this regard, and this in relation to all votes. Yes, we cannot hear you very well because there are very short interruptions. I acknowledge that there is nothing to report. And could you please repeat, because we couldn't hear that well. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I don't know exactly what to do, but again, I declare I have nothing to report in this regard, and this in relation to all votes. Please, if you have any information to add, you can go ahead. So I have additional communication. On April 19, 2021, and today, the company holds 19,642,115 treasury shares, that is 2.70% of the share capital. According to the information in the shareholder register on April 19, 2021, and based on the information received, those shareholders who hold directly or indirectly shares with voting rights that exceed 3% of the total shares issued are the following: CDP Reti 31.35%, Romano Minozzi 7.45%, BlackRock 5.16%, Lazard Asset Management LLC 5.03%. Pursuant to Article 1 and 20 of the CLF, those who hold significant stakes in the company, as per the current provisions of law and regulations, must disclose this fact to the company and Council. In case of failure to make said disclosures, the voting right may not be exercised, and therefore the appointed representative will be asked on behalf of any entitled parties to make this known for all the votes. The company is aware of the following shareholders agreement published pursuant to law on the company website. Shareholders agreement between GDP State Grid Europe Limited and State Grid International Development Limited. I inform you that in relation to the right to ask questions pursuant to Article 127 some questions were received prior to shareholders meeting from shareholder Marco Bava at Common, in line with the procedures indicated in the call notice. As per the aforementioned regulations and the call notice, a specific file containing the related answers has already been published on April 25th, 2021 on the company's website and will be attached to the meeting. I invited the appointed representative to indicate for each vote the number of shares for which he does not intend to participate in voting pursuant to Article 135 undiches, that is, non-conferment of instructions, and to make declarations required by the applicable law in the event that, if preconditions are met, he intends to vote against the instructions he has received. Any interest pursuant to Article 135, subsection 4 of the CLF. Can we go on, Mr. Chairman? Before proceeding to the debate, the items on the agenda, I inform you I would like to amend something. Avvocato Tonetti is not attending the meeting and has justified his non-attendance. The report of the Board of Directors containing the resolutions, proposed for the resolutions, have been filed at the company's headquarters and made available to the public on the company website and at the authorized storage mechanism, e-market storage, in accordance with the law, and have been sent to those who requested them. In relation to the items on the agenda, if the appointed representative does not object, I propose dealing with items number 1 and 2 on the agenda together. Naturally, the votes are separate for each item on the agenda. Furthermore, if the appointed representative has nothing to object, for all the items on the agenda, I propose omitting the reading the aforementioned documentation. The resolution proposals will be read out. Yes, I agree. I do not have any objections to the proposal formulated by the chairman. Moving to point number 1 and 2 on the agenda, Snam financial statement and the consolidated financial statement as at December 31st, 2020, reports of the directors and allocation of the profits for the year and distribution of the dividend. I ask Mr. Marchetti to provide additional information with regard to financial statement documentation and the activities of the independent auditor firm. I inform you that the file containing financial statements of Snam, the consolidated financial statement, the director's report on operations, the reports of the Board of Statutory Auditors and the independent auditing firm, as well as the proposals of the Board of Directors to the shareholders meeting regarding the approval of the financial statement and the allocation of the period profit have been filed at the registered office of the company and made available to the public on the company website and the authorized storage mechanism e-market storage. I refer to the shareholders and stakeholders letter, the text of which is set out in the 2020 annual financial report published in accordance with the law. And I invite Valco Alverà, Chief Executive Officer, to outline the activities and the key results for 2020. The Chief Executive Officer intervention will be reported in the minutes of the shareholders meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 2020 has been a very difficult year for the whole world because of the COVID pandemic, and the pandemic is not over yet. Lombardy was the first region to have been affected outside China, and the first cases were right close to Milan. We have continued to work remotely to guarantee supplies. During the most acute stages of the pandemic, we implemented some strategic measures like the locked-in, and we asked colleagues to be isolated to comply with the safety protocols, but we have continued to supply energy. And I would like to thank our personnel, our staff, both inside the company and outside the company, for all the effort they made and the commitment to guarantee safety in terms of supply and also in terms of sales and technical service. In addition to service continuity for the 14th year in a row, despite the difficulties and the lockdown, we have completed all our investment projects in line with expectations. This was a challenge that proved the strength of our company, our skills, the knowledge we have in terms of energy safety for Italy and other countries as well. We invested over 1 billion euros. We increased by 4% as compared to 2019. We will increase by an additional 14% to 1.4 billion euros. We have implemented very complex projects. This is one of the major strengths of Snam. We wanted to complete the TAP, which was one of the most complex projects globally, and we completed it after 4 years of work, and we completed it beforehand. Then the participation of Snam was crucial to complete this project. So in spite of the very hard time, we managed to exceed our net profit forecast at international level and at domestic level with projects connected to energy transition. We made major step forward, and we had a pipeline in Abu Dhabi. We have set up an important consortium. We invested on a regular basis in technology, in innovation, in the supply chain of hydrogen, because we had participations in IGM Power in England and in a company based in Milan. Our startup that are working for energy transition have contributed significantly and positively to the 2020 results, in spite of some delays because of the pandemic. Hydrogen, biomethane, energy efficiency will be the pillars of our growth, of our long-term growth. In 2020, in spite of the impact of the pandemic, we generated satisfactory economic results. Regulated revenues are increasing by 57 million euros. EBITDA adjusted in 2020 is increasing by 28 million as compared to 2019. We have also contributions from our subsidiaries, Snam Global Solutions, inter alia, and also the project to reduce costs has compensated the reduction of the gas demand because of the pandemic. So, as I said, subsidiaries' contribution increased by 33 million euros, and this because of the acquisition of ADNOC gas pipeline and the positive contribution of TAP, for a total of 30 million euros. And these are the positive effects. Financial charges were reduced by 39 million euros as compared to 2019. They contributed to 6.5% of growth in the net profit, adjusted net profit. Based on the results we achieved, the shareholder meetings is invited to resolve on the increase in the dividend by to 0.2495. And the second tranche will be distributed on June 23rd, 2021. With the relevant coupon. So in addition to economic results, our commitment for sustainability is even stronger. So in 2020, we became aware that we have to face climate changes. In spite of the impact of pandemic, the reduction of emissions was lower than expected. The International Energy Agency in the last few days outlined that in 2021, unfortunately, emissions will increase by over 5% and will probably reach an unprecedented level. It is paramount to take concrete steps. Snam decided to reduce its CO2 emissions that have been declining in 2020 as against 2019. We were the first to announce a goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2020. We want to reach this target concerning Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, that is direct and indirect emissions, through an intermediate step in 2020. We will probably reduce emissions by 50%. And this is, we will do it before our competitors. As far as the social sector is concerned, we are focusing on our community. We have supported the national health system through protective masks, ventilators. We helped third sector organizations to support the most fragile people. And we would like to thank all those who contributed to this. I think that the well-being is crucial. We have implemented new forms of engagement, new welfare initiatives for the well-being of the people working with us and our families. We will launch a World Wellbeing Movement before the end of the year to measure and promote well-being not only among our staff but for the company as a whole. 2020 were very important to promote diversity and inclusion. We have taken initiatives on gender parity, and for the second year in a row, new gender equality index has awarded us. As far as governance is concerned, transparency and responsibility are our pillars. We have completed the statutory adjustments that highlight our commitment for energy transition. Against this background, we have launched an ESG scorecard with very ambitious targets focusing on environment, natural gas, reduction, and green revolution, and biodiversity. S means social, welfare, empowerment and involvement of employees, gender diversity, and also on governance structure, reliability of infrastructures, and a fight against corruption. We will monitor all the indicators because we think that only if we can measure something, we can actually implement it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Albera, CEO, and I refer to the conclusion contained in the report of the Board of Statutory Auditors to the shareholders meeting in accordance with Article 153 and the final part of the report of the independent auditing firm on the financial statements on the year ended December 31st, 2020. I ask Mr. Marchetti to continue reading the proposed resolutions of the Board of Directors regarding items 1 and 2 on the agenda and the completion of the operations to be carried out by the shareholders through the appointed representative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to the financial statements, dear shareholders, you are invited to approve the financial statement of Snam S.p.A., which shows a profit of 1,015,066,306.21 euros. And allocation of the period profit, dear shareholders, you are invited to allocate the profit for the year of 688,698,779.95 euros remaining after the distribution of an advance on the dividend for the 2020 fiscal year of 0.09 euros per share, resolved by the Board of Directors meeting of November 4. 2020 to the shareholders as a dividend of 0.14 euros per share to shares in circulation on the coupon payment date, excluding treasury shares in the portfolio on that date, as a balance of the advance on the dividend attributing to the remaining amount to the retained profits for the previous year. The dividend related to the 2020 fiscal year, therefore, is 0.2495 euros per share. Payout the dividend balance of 0.1497 euros per share, starting on the 23rd of June 2021, with coupon payment date 21st June 2020 and record date 22nd of June 2021. Any questions from the appointed representative? No questions or remarks. I declare that there are no interventions, questions, or objections. Yes, so we move on to the discussion of item 3. So I declare that there are no interventions, questions, and proposals on this item. Point number 3, authorization to purchase and disposal of treasury shares subject to revocation of the authorization granted by the ordinary shareholders meeting of June 18, 2020 for the part not yet implemented. Mr. Marchetti, please read out the proposed resolution. So I will summarize a few points concerning the resolution. So, dear shareholders, you are invited to revoke the previous authorization resolution. Item number 2, to authorize the Board of Directors on its behalf, the CEO, to purchase treasury shares for a maximum duration of 18 months for a maximum outlay of 500 million euros for a maximum limit of shares in the portfolio of 6.5% and regulations based on the regulations or procedures established by Article 5 and the price cannot exceed or be lower than 5% of the reference price on the market set in the previous meeting. Except for the liquidity of shares. And if this is the case, we will apply the rules by Consob. Point number 3, to authorize the Board of Directors to dispose of the part of the treasury shares of the company, and to set the ways and means in the best way possible and according to the law in force. I ask the appointed representative whether there are questions or interventions. No interventions and no questions. So we move on to point number 4. Number 4 is divided into 2 sessions.
The first one is binding, and the second one is the report on the consideration padded and is not binding. I confirm that the report on the remuneration policy for 2021 was deposited with the company, made available to the public on the website of the company, and with the e-market storage mechanism already mentioned. The report was also sent to those who so requested to receive it. Back to the letter to the shareholders included in the report. It describes the main activities carried out by the Remuneration Committee in 2020 as published per the law, and I invite the lawyer Francesca Pace, chairperson of the Remuneration Committee, to illustrate its main contents. This intervention as well, like that of the CDO, will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Ms. Pace, thank you, Ms. Chairman. Good day, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to present together with Professor Ritaroli and Alessandro Tonetti the report on the remuneration policy and compensations paid. Thank you for the appreciation shown with the favorable vote for the last year. The committee confirms that it focuses on dialogue, engagement, interaction with the main users of the report, so as to get a feedback from proxy advisors and all of the shareholders. One of the purposes of this report is to help boost awareness of stakeholders of the correlation between the remuneration policies of the company and business strategies as part of an increasingly complex context and based upon the new challenges that Snam tackles with the commitment of outstanding management. The committee considered the opportunity on the one hand to strengthen further the effectiveness of the remuneration policy in terms of the performance and the contribution to achieve the strategic plan 2020-2024 through a KPI system connected to incentive systems reflecting the new goals of the plan. On the other hand, it wants to make the representation of some elements of the report clearer and more effective, including in view of the provisions of the new issuers regulation. In particular, we have further detailed in the first section of the document some of the elements that characterize the remuneration policy of Snam. In the second part, we've provided more information on the actual achievement of goals linked to the incentives of the CEO. In 2021, the company confirms an increasing commitment in terms of investments to develop new businesses related to environmental sustainability and focused on energy transition that the CEO talked to us about. The invariable incentive short-term plan reflects the strategic challenges of Snam for this year and ensures a strong correlation with the economic and financial goals of the company and the ESG themes. These priorities are mainly reflected in the following novelties present in the goals for 2021: introduction of a KPI aimed to evaluate in accordance with the 2024 strategic plan guidelines, the development of Snam assets in Sardinia, a confirmation of the inclusion of maintenance of Snam at outstanding levels compared to the sustainability index of FTSE for Good, CDP Climate Change, and others, plus from this year, the Sustainalytics Index, introduction of metrics aimed to evaluate Snam performance in terms of increasing absolute value of sustainable funding in 2021. Inclusion in the perimeter of the evaluation of the Snam performance of workers' accidents at only 6 months from the acquisition of contractors. I want to highlight that this challenge is quite demanding, which shows once more Snam's focus on safety. As to the long-term incentive plan, the main purpose is to steer the management towards achieving the strategic corporate goals by promoting at the same time the creation of sustainable value in the mid to long term for shareholders, in line with our corporate purpose. And thanks to the fruitful collaboration with the ESG committee, which I thank, we confirmed the weighting of 20% of the ESG goals with more challenging goals compared to the previous year and ensured by the presence of some parameters. The metrics aims to evaluate Snam performances in terms of curbing natural gas emissions subsequent to joining the new framework of the UN, with which Snam adhered in September 2020, adopting the new plan to 2025 with more demanding targets in terms of curbing the emissions. As a result of this, with respect to the 2020-2023 and 2022-2024 cycle, the long-term incentive plan will be aligned with what will be provided for by the plan from time to time, and we will adjust this in view of achieving the final target according to this framework. And then gender diversity indicator. Snam is committed on this front, and I want to point out that the gender pay gap monitoring activities done to eliminate this gap are applied as part of the remuneration policy, which incentivizes actual gender equality in line with the Snam ethical code. In conclusion, I'd like to remind you that through the Diamo Forma al Futuro program, in many ways, we've raised funds and the CEO and the other people of Snam voluntarily adhered. And this is for the people disrupted by the pandemic. And these people have been identified together with Snam Foundation for the significant contribution towards the activities of the committee. I'd like to thank Rolli Antonetti and Donata Paola Patrini. I'd like to also seize the opportunity to thank on behalf of the committee for the support during the AGM, trusting that the report provides a clear idea of the remuneration policy and its implementation, thus witnessing the commitment and engagement over the last few years of Snam. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Francesca Pace, the chairman of the Remuneration Committee, and I'm asking Professor Marchetti, with the consent of the designated representative, to read the proposed resolution relating to item 4, as well as to verify any interventions by shareholders through the designated representative. Thank you. 4.1 is the approval of the first section of the remuneration policy for compensations of 2021 of Snam, as prepared by the board under 123 ter. And I'm reading the other one, which instead is 4.2, and it is the favorable vote for the second section of the report on the remuneration policy and compensation paid by Snam in 2021. So on both items that will be put to the vote separately later on, we ask, as usual, the confirmation that no one wishes to speak or make comments among the shareholders who delegated the representative. I confirm that no one wishes to speak on these two items. Okay, thank you. I would say that there remains, before the voting, the presentation of item 5. So the floor goes back to the chairperson. Thank you. Item 5 relates to the proposed modification of the long-term incentive plan for 2020-2022 and relevant resolutions. Here as well, the document relating to the incentive plan was published and has been deposited with the company and published on the website with e-market storage. And so, Professor Marchetti, the floor goes back to you with the consent of the designated representative so that you can read the proposed resolution on item 5 and verify if any shareholder wishes to speak. Okay, in this case, the resolution is, in summary, to approve under 114 bis the change to the long-term incentive plan with respect to the second cycle of attribution and third cycle of attribution in compliance with the terms described in the information document made available to the public as required by the applicable regulations, and subject to all of the other non-modifiable terms and conditions, and then giving to the board and the CEO with sub-delegation power all of the powers to fully and entirely implement the preceding resolutions and changes thereto with respect to the share plan, including, by way of example and without limitation, to inform the market and prepare the documents required with respect to this resolution and the share plan and their implementation. Mr. Trevisan, on item 5 as well, I guess that no one wishes to speak amongst the shareholders. I confirm, no one wishes to speak. So, Mr. Chairman, since we've dealt with all of the items of the agenda to be transacted for the day, if you agree, I can move on to the resolutions. Yes, because in light of this, I declare closed the discussion on the items of the agenda to be transacted for the day. And so I'm asking you, Professor Marchetti, to wait to carry out the voting. So let's start from item 1 of the accounts at the end of 2020. So, since the details of the voting as required by the law will be attached to the meetings, we can ask the designated representative to communicate to us the percentages on the shares present of the votes on item 1 of the agenda. So, thank you, declaring that I have received all the voting instructions on the shares in respect of which I've received a proxy in favor of 2,442,173,233 shares equal to 99.93% of the represented capital, abstaining 1,905,521 shares equal to 0.07% of the represented share capital. So there are no voters. Okay, the proposal has been approved by majority. I would say that we consider that you have received all the voting instructions for the shares, save as notified otherwise by you. Okay. We'll take it for granted for the following voting. Okay, we can move on to item 2, i.e. appropriation of the profit according to the resolution that we've read. Over to you. Okay, with respect to item 2, in favor 2,438,163,163 shares equal to 99.77% of the represented capital against 5,815,591 shares equal to 0.94% of the represented capital. No one abstained. No one didn't vote. Thank you. Thank you. This proposal as well has been approved by a majority. Next following one, it relates to the authorization to purchase and dispose own shares, which is item 3 of the agenda of the items to be transacted for the day. Here as well, the designated representative is invited to tell us about the votes. Thank you. In favor, 2,436,625,982 shares equal to 99.70% of the represented capital. Abstaining, 50,826 shares equal to almost 0. Against, 7,301,946 shares. And no one didn't vote. Thank you. Thank you so much. The proposal on the purchase and disposal of own shares has been approved by a majority. Let's move on 4.1, i.e. the resolution which is binding on the first section of the report on the remuneration policy. Over to you. Thank you. In favor, 2,121,497,580 shares. I'm sorry, but the audio went off. Abstaining. I'm sorry, but the sound is not working. Against 43,271,700. Again, the sound is spotty. We didn't hear. Yes. Can you repeat the percentages? Because no one could hear you. Thank you. Sure. In favor, 97.81% of the represented capital. Abstaining, 0.42% of the represented capital. Against, 1.77% of the represented capital. Thank you. Let us now move on to the non-binding resolution of 4.2, that is to say, guidance on compensation actually paid. Over to you. Ooh, maybe you can only read the percentages so that it is clearer. Okay, I'll stick to the percentages only. In favor, 96.79%. Abstaining, 1.60%. Against, 1.62%. No one didn't vote? And congrats. Because I'm sorry, but the sound is really spotty. Again, off the records, congrats on my side as well, because a percentage of this guidance on section 2 is well above the average. Most especially in companies where the market share is significant. So, let us go back to the record with the last voting on item 5, i.e. change in the share incentive plan. Okay, over to you. In favor, 99.63% of the represented capital. Abstaining, 0.16% of the represented capital. Against, sound not available. And no one didn't vote. Mr. Chairman, the AGM approved all of the items of the agenda to be transacted for the day. So, for the last time, the floor goes back to you for the closing Yes, we've dealt with all of the items and voted on them. There's nothing else to be voted on and discussed. I'd like to thank all of the participants in person and remote, and we close at 10:51 a.m. Thank you all once more. Thank you all and goodbye. Thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye. Sorry for the sound problems, but then we've made it. Enjoy the rest of the day.